Jesus wasn't supposed to speak to that woman, but he did. In the heat of the day, alone, tired, in a place where no one expected to find him, Jesus sits by a well. So far, nothing unusual, until a woman approaches. A Samaritan woman. It could have been just another scene, but if this were a film, this would be the moment the music cuts and silence fills the air. Because everything, absolutely everything about this image screamed, "This is wrong." A Jewish man, alone, speaking with a woman in public, and not just any woman, but a Samaritan. This wasn't just frowned upon, it was forbidden, unthinkable, and for the religious elite, borderline offensive. But Jesus doesn't seem to care. He doesn't preach at her, doesn't avoid her, doesn't look away. He talks to her. And more than that, he starts the conversation. He asks for water, shows vulnerability, and slowly a simple exchange of words turns into the beginning of something deeply transformative. What was so special about this woman? Nothing. And that's exactly where the miracle begins. She was a woman, already at a disadvantage in a patriarchal society. She was Samaritan, part of a people rejected by the Jews. And she had a past that made the whole village cross the street to avoid her, 5 failed marriages, and now a 6th relationship out of wedlock. In a time when a woman's worth was measured by purity and submission, she was a lost cause. Ever felt like that? Ever had the sense that if people really knew who you are or what you've done, they'd treat you differently? Ever felt too ashamed to come before God, thinking he only deals with those who are pure, sorted, and spiritually presentable? Then, this story is for you. Because the most powerful part of Jesus' encounter with this woman isn't that he knew everything about her. It's that he knew and stayed, kept talking, kept offering, kept embracing, and there's more. Jesus chose that place. He was there on purpose. The disciples had gone off to buy food. He could have gone with them. But he stayed, sat, waited, because he knew she would come, knew the hour, knew the shame, knew the heat. And still, he chose that exact moment to be there. It wasn't coincidence. It was intentional. And when she arrives, surprise, he doesn't open with a sermon. He starts with a question, a simple request. Can I have a drink of water? But that question opens the door to a conversation that crosses social, religious, moral, and emotional lines. Within minutes, Jesus reveals things about her that no one else could know. And still, he offers something she's never been given: respect, attention, welcome. He offers living water, a different kind of thirst, a promise that goes beyond religion. It touches the soul. It's striking how Jesus doesn't just break one rule, he breaks several at once. He speaks to a woman, a Samaritan, a known sinner. And not just speaks, he treats her with dignity, reveals himself as the Messiah, and turns her into a witness. Before she even understands everything, she's already spreading the word. Before she studies the Torah, before she sorts out her love life, before she learns to pray the right way, she's already someone leading others to Jesus. This might be one of the most subversive encounters in the entire Bible, because Jesus doesn't try to change her before accepting her. He accepts her, and that changes everything. And here's the central point of this video. Jesus didn't wait for her to get her life together before speaking to her. He met her exactly where she was. And maybe he's doing the same with you. Right now, you don't need to be clean, fixed, or figured out to be found by Jesus. In fact, it's often when you're in the middle of the mess, carrying guilt, avoiding people, looking for water in all the wrong places, that he's waiting for you. This story isn't just about a forgotten woman at an ancient well. It's about anyone who's ever felt unwanted, unworthy, invisible. It's about the kind of people Jesus goes out of his way to find. And if you've ever felt like you don't fit the mold, that it's too late, or that you've messed up too much, maybe today is your moment at the well, because Jesus still waits. Picture the scene. A devout Jewish man in broad daylight, alone, talking with a Samaritan woman in a public place. To understand how shocking this is, you need to know how that society worked. There were unspoken rules, deeply ingrained ones, about who could speak to whom, how, and when, and Jesus ignores them all. First, there's the ethnic barrier. Jews and Samaritans hated each other. It was a long-standing feud rooted in religion, politics, and culture. Jews saw Samaritans as traitors, people of mixed blood who had corrupted scripture and abandoned the true temple. Samaritans, in turn, had their own traditions and places of worship and rejected Jerusalem as their spiritual center. The divide ran so deep, most Jews would go out of their way just to avoid Samaria. Jesus doesn't just pass through. He stops, sits, and starts a conversation. Then comes the religious barrier. Devout Jewish men didn't speak to women in public, not even their own wives sometimes. That was the custom among rabbis. Preserve appearances, maintain distance, avoid even a hint of scandal. But Jesus, a rabbi in the eyes of the people, speaks to a lone woman, and he does it as an equal. And finally, the most uncomfortable barrier, morality. Her reputation was known. The Bible itself points out that she had 5 husbands and was now with a man who wasn't her husband. That, by the standards of the day, was grounds for total social rejection. No wonder she goes to the well in the heat of day when no one else is around. She's avoiding stares, avoiding whispers, avoiding people, but Jesus goes straight to her. The conversation starts with a request for water, but quickly turns into something much deeper. He shows that he knows her story, not to shame her, but to invite her. He doesn't say, "Come back when you've cleaned up your act." He simply offers something greater than her circumstances, living water for the soul. What Jesus does here isn't just breaking rules. He's redefining what matters. To him, people matter more than prejudice. Her pain matters more than protocol. Her heart is worth more than her reputation. And that raises an uncomfortable question. How often do we avoid people because of so-called spiritual rules that are really just fear or pride in disguise? Maybe you've crossed paths with someone society told you to avoid. Someone with a label, a messy story, a past that speaks louder than their present. And without realizing it, you backed away. Or worse, you thought that was the righteous thing to do. Jesus shows a different way, a way where compassion beats culture, where love outranks tradition. He's not defiled by coming close to her. On the contrary, he changes the entire atmosphere by his presence, and he still does that today. The woman came to the well for water, but Jesus saw a different kind of thirst. He starts with the physical, "Give me a drink." Makes sense. It's a hot day, a dry region, a deep well. But Jesus wasn't just thirsty for water, he was there for something else. He came to reach the thirst she didn't know how to name. "If you knew who it is that asks you for a drink," he said, "you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." She doesn't get it at first. She thinks he's talking about plumbing, magic, some way to avoid returning to the well again. A practical defensive response. But Jesus is talking about the soul. The living water he offers is spiritual life, restoration, God's presence flowing from within. It doesn't depend on where you worship or who you're with. It's a kind of fulfillment that never dries up because it comes from the Spirit. Then he hits the most sensitive spot. "Go, call your husband," she hesitates. "I have no husband." Jesus replies with something that could have crushed her, but in his voice, it sounds like freedom. "You're right. You've had 5. And the man you're with now isn't your husband. He doesn't humiliate her. He sees her. And that changes everything." Jesus brings up her past, not to condemn her, but to acknowledge her. It's like he's saying, "I know exactly who you are, and I'm still here, offering you something new." This woman had tried to quench her thirst in ways that failed over and over. Relationships that promised safety, love, belonging, but left her emptier. And how many of us do the same? Maybe your thirst isn't called relationships. Maybe it's acceptance, self-worth, validation, control, status, or achievement. The truth is, we all carry invisible thirsts. A hunger the world tries to fill with noise, speed, titles, image, but none of it satisfies. That's what Jesus offers there. Something that doesn't depend on location, like Jerusalem or Mount Gerizim, or history, like broken marriages, or perfection, like the Pharisees demanded. He offers a living connection with God from the inside out, like a spring overflowing. And notice how Jesus handles the conversation. He doesn't ignore her past, but he doesn't define her by it either. He doesn't pretend her mistakes never happened, but he doesn't use them as a wall. There's a name for that, grace, and maybe the deepest thirst of the Samaritan woman, and of our generation, is exactly that, to be fully known and still fully loved. No pretending, no hiding, no earning, because deep down, we don't just want someone who approves of us when we're good. We want someone who stays when we're broken. Jesus does that. That's why this encounter transforms her. It wasn't a miracle or a physical healing or a supernatural vision. It was being seen, heard, respected, and receiving, right there in her mess, a promise of new life. And now, Maybe it's your turn to hear this question. What are you thirsty for? What have you been chasing to feel complete? Where do you keep going back, even though it never truly satisfies? Jesus still offers living water, and it doesn't matter if you've had 5 failed tries or 50. The well is still open. After just a few minutes of conversation, that woman leaves her jar behind. The very reason she went to the well no longer matters. She runs back to town, and what she does next is almost unbelievable. She doesn't hide, doesn't overthink it, doesn't wait to figure out her theology, fix her life, or dress the part. She simply says, "Come, meet a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he be the Christ?" This woman, who moments ago avoided everyone to fetch water under the burning sun, now becomes the voice calling the city together. She opens up, uses herself as the example, and all this, not because of a sermon on religion, but because of an encounter. She didn't have all the answers, still had her wounds, but something inside her had already changed. And here's something that can reshape how we see faith. You don't have to be ready to be used by God. She didn't get saved and then share. Her testimony was part of the process. It's like by telling her story, she began to understand who Jesus really was. Her faith didn't come from logic, it came from impact, from a look, a conversation, a taste of living water. That woman became an evangelist without even knowing it, and the town listened. John's Gospel says many Samaritans believed because of her testimony. That's powerful. Someone no one took seriously becomes the messenger of a profound revelation, the deepest one yet. Jesus is the Messiah, and he's accessible. Jesus hadn't even told his disciples that clearly. He didn't reveal it to the Pharisees, but he told her, and she told others. It's as if God was saying, it doesn't matter who you were. What matters is what you've seen and what you'll do with it. You don't need to quote verses. You don't need all the answers. You don't need to be a model believer. Just share what changed you. Speak honestly about what Jesus did in your life, because no one can argue with your experience. No one can say you weren't seen, or touched, or called. Maybe you feel like you don't have enough spiritual background to talk about God. But do you really need it? The Samaritan woman proves that what convinces people isn't religious mastery, but honest testimony. People who speak from experience, not just from hearsay. And if you've ever had a moment where you felt truly seen by God, that's enough. To start, most people looked at that woman and saw a walking scandal, someone marked by bad choices, broken relationships, a ruined reputation. Someone to avoid, not an example, not useful. But Jesus looked and saw thirst, a hunger for truth, a heart tired of pretending, longing for something real, and that changed everything. The difference between the way people see and the way Jesus sees is all about focus. Where society saw sin, he saw emptiness. Where others saw behavior, he saw the pain behind it. Jesus never sugar-coated sin, but he didn't use it as a reason to stay away either. He drew near, spoke, revealed, and offered transformation through truth. That gaze reveals something vital about God's heart. He doesn't wait for us to be clean before coming close. He comes while we're still messy, but to experience that kind of encounter, you have to let the mask fall. The woman at the well didn't pretend. She answered honestly, "I have no husband." She was real, and Jesus met her with grace. Because truth, when confessed, makes room for healing. Maybe that's why so many spiritual practices involve vulnerability, confession, silence, sincere prayer. That's when we stop presenting the acceptable version of ourselves and just show up as we are, no filter, no performance. That's when Jesus' gaze finds us. And that gaze changes everything. Because when you're fully seen and still fully loved, something inside you starts to breathe again. The encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman is one of the most human, radical moments in the Bible. Not because of spectacular miracles or grand speeches, but because of how Jesus gently tears down every wall between people and steps close to someone no one wanted near. Jesus didn't ignore society's rules. He confronted them, gently, deliberately, courageously. He spoke to a woman, a Samaritan, someone marked by scandal, and made her the first messenger of his identity as Messiah. That says a lot about the kind of God he is. We've seen that soul thirst isn't always obvious. It hides behind legitimate pursuits for acceptance, love, stability. But none of those fill the gap when your heart is disconnected from the true source. Jesus offered that woman something no one else could, inner satisfaction. And finally, we see that you don't have to be ready to be used by God. The woman left transformed, not because everything was fixed, but because she was seen. And once you've truly been seen by Jesus, you carry something worth sharing. This story shows the heart of a God who isn't shocked by your past, who isn't scandalized by your failures, who cares about your thirst. Jesus still speaks to the ones no one expects, still offers new life to those who've given up, and still turns unlikely people into messengers of His grace. If this story spoke to you, drop it in the comments, "Jesus saw me." And if you want to keep walking this journey with us, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone who needs it, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Thanks for watching. God bless you.